Before the shadows of Ravenshide envelop us, allow me a moment, dear listener. You are about to step into a realm where secrets whisper through the walls, and every corner hides a mystery deeper than the last. But a tale like this should not be experienced alone. Join our court, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell, so no chapter of this gripping story escapes your notice. If this tale of forbidden love and buried truths captures your heart, leave your like. Each one lights a candle in these darkened halls. And please, share this mystery with those brave enough to face what slumbers within these walls. But beware. Once you save this video and cross these gates with us, there is no turning back. The slumbering king awaits, and his story, well, his story begins now. The carriage wheels groaned like a dying man as last breath, as they carved uneven tracks through the mud. Serafina Claremont pressed her chapped lips together, tasting the iron tang of fear on her tongue. Outside the rattling windows, the world had dissolved into a grayscale nightmare. Twisted oaks clawing at a leaden sky, their branches weighed down by curtains of fog that slithered across the moors. Somewhere in that suffocating whiteness loomed Ravenshide Castle, though no sane soul would call it a home. It was a carcass of stone, a monument to forgotten kings and whispered sins, exactly where fate had decided to abandon her. She tightened her grip on the letter in her lap, its edges frayed from being folded, and unfolded 100 times since the village priest had pressed it into her hand 2 weeks prior. The ink had bled from rain and nervous sweat, but the words were branded into her memory. Kitchen maid, required. Ravenshide Castle. No references needed. A blessing for a woman with no family, no dowry, and a past best left buried in unmarked graves. The priest hadn't met her eyes when he'd given it, hadn't warned her about the stories. But the tavern keeper had, after plying her with ale she couldn't afford. 10 years the king slept, he'd slurred, yellowed teeth gleaming in the firelight. 10 years since aught moved in that castle, except shadows and spiders. They say his lordship's men find new servants every spring, never the same ones come winter. A jolt sent her forehead smacking against the window. Through the pain-blurred glass, the gates rose, black iron teeth gnashing at the sky. No guards manned the posts, no banners snapped in the wind. Just those grotesque metal ravens perched atop the pillars, their wings spread as if to swallow anyone foolish enough to pass beneath. The carriage lurched forward, and for one dizzying moment, Serafina swore their beaked heads turned to watch her. The castle itself emerged from the mist like a corpse surfacing from peat. Towers leaned drunkenly against each other, their once proud crenellations now jagged as a beggar's smile. Ivy strangled the walls, its leaves unnaturally dark, as though fed on something richer than sunlight. And the windows, God above, the windows, were eyes robbed of sight, gaping and empty. Her stomach clenched when the carriage halted in the courtyard. Not a soul came to greet her. Just the whimper of hinges as the great oak door creaked open, exhaling air that smelled of wet stone and something faintly sweet beneath the decay, like roses left too long in a sealed coffin. She counted 17 uneven steps to the entrance, her boots sinking into moss that muffled all sound. The silence here wasn't peaceful, it was the hush of a held breath, of something pretending to be dead while very much awake. Her pulse hammered in her throat as she crossed the threshold. Inside, the cold gnawed deeper than winter ever could. Candles flickered in their sconces, not with warmth but the sickly glow of swamp lights. The tapestries lining the walls might have been magnificent once. Now they hung in tatters, their embroidered lords and ladies reduced to eyeless faces and grasping hands. And the floor. She paused mid-step. The black and white tiles formed no pattern, just a dizzying swarm of shapes that made her head swim. Deliberate, designed to confuse. Lost already? The voice sliced through the gloom. A woman descended the staircase, her skirts whispering against the steps, not a rustle of fabric, but the hiss of a blade being drawn. Lady Beatrice Holloway. Even without introduction, Serafina knew. The woman's spine was so straight it seemed unnatural, her neck rising from the starched collar like a pale stalk from poisoned soil. Silver hair scraped back into a knot so tight it pulled her features into a permanent sneer. But her eyes, Those were worst. Not cruel, not kind, simply absent. As if whatever had once lived behind them had been scooped out long ago. You're late. No greeting, no name, just an indictment. The others arrived at dawn. Serafina's mouth went dry. The roads were mud, always are. Lady Beatrice's gaze crawled over her, lingering on the darned elbows of her dress, the scuffed toes of her boots, calculating how much hunger and shame she could leverage. You'll work the scullery first. Laundry when cook decides you won't boil the linens to rags, and the fires. Her gloved hand shot out, gripping Serafina's chin with fingers that felt more like bone than flesh. Must never go out, not even embers, do you understand? She nodded, too rattled to speak. The woman's breath smelled of mint and something bitter beneath. Good. Release came with a small shove. You'll sleep in the east wing, 3rd floor, the last maid left, abruptly. A smile flickered, there and gone. Mind you don't wander after dark. These old walls have ears and teeth. The room they gave her was little more than a closet wedged between a drafty corridor and what might have been a disused chapel. A pallet barely wide enough for a child, a wash basin with a brownish stain circling the drain, and a window, if one could call the arrow slit a window, that showed nothing but the storm-lashed moors. Serafina sank onto the bed, her fingers brushing something carved into the bedpost. Faint grooves in the wood. Letters. A V E. She traced them, wondering which desperate girl had left this mark before her, and where she was now. Dinner in the servants' hall was a silent affair. 20-odd souls chewing stale bread and thin stew, their eyes never lifting from their bowls. No jokes, no gossip. Just the clink of spoons and the occasional wet cough from the shadows. She tried to catch someone's gaze, the red-haired girl scrubbing pots, the old man mending boots by the hearth, but they all found sudden interest in their laps when she looked their way. It wasn't tea until the scraping of benches signaled the meal's end that a figure slid onto the bench beside her. An old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her left eye milky with cataracts. She smelled of rosemary and lye. "Genevieve," she muttered, pressing a heel of bread into Serafina's hand. "Eat, you'll need your strength." "For what?" The woman's good eye darted toward the high table where Lady Beatrice sat sipping wine. "For surviving." Then lower. "They never last, the pretty ones. He likes them sweet-voiced and soft-skinned." Serafina's blood turned to ice. "Who?" But Genevieve was already shuffling away, her warning hanging in the air like smoke. That night, as wind screamed through the arrow slit and rats scratched in the walls, Serafina learned the castle's true horror. Not the cold, not the silence, but the sounds that came when the silence broke, the creak of a floorboard just outside her door, the wet clicking noise, like a tongue peeling off the roof of a mouth, that seemed to come from the ceiling above her bed, and worst of all, the whisper that slithered through the keyhole just as she was drifting into exhausted sleep. Serafina. Her eyes flew open. No one in this cursed place knew her name. Not truly. The employment letter had been addressed only to the Claremont girl. The doorknob rattled. Slow. Testing. She lunged for the candle, but her trembling hands sent it crashing to the floor. In the sudden dark, something scratched along the door's surface. Long, deliberate strokes. Nails? A knife? Her breath came in shallow gasps as the scratching moved lower, lower, until it reached the gap beneath the door, then stopped. A wet, indrawn breath from the other side, and then, impossibly, a whisper from inside the room. "He's dreaming of you." The voice was everywhere and nowhere, curling around her like a noose. Serafina pressed her back against the wall, her pulse a frantic drumbeat in her ears. Outside, the footsteps retreated, leaving only the echo of that terrible promise hanging in the air. Somewhere in this rotting castle, a king slept, and something else was very, very awake. The scratching at her door had stopped just before dawn. Serafina hadn't slept, hadn't dared close her eyes after that voice slithered through the cracks of her room. "He's dreaming of you." The words coiled in her stomach like spoiled meat. Who? The sleeping king? Or something worse? When the bell tolled for morning chores, she stumbled into the corridor with shadows bruising her eyes. The castle breathed around her, its hallways twisting in ways she swore hadn't been there the night before. A tapestry she passed yesterday, a hunting scene with stags and hounds, now depicted a faceless crowd watching a man on a pyre. The stitches glistened, wet to the touch. The kitchen was a relief until she saw the blood. It streaked the chopping block in thin, deliberate lines, too fresh to be from yesterday's slaughter. The scullery maid, red-haired, maybe 16, scoured the stone with salt, her fingers raw. She flinched when Serafina reached for a bucket. "Don't." The girl's whisper was frayed. "Cook says it's bad luck to clean another's mess." Serafina eyed the rust-colored streaks. What happened? A pot clanged behind them. The girl vanished into the steam as Cook emerged, his apron splattered with the same dark stains. "You." He jabbed a cleaver at Serafina. "Laundry. Now." The laundry chambers lay in the castle's belly, a cavern of suds and screaming kettles. Women with stooped backs stirred vats of linens, their arms mottled from scalding water. No one spoke. The only sounds were the hiss of boiling cloth and the occasional whimper when someone's skin met copper. She was handed a paddle and pointed to the oldest vat, its contents blackened, reeking of lye and something metallic. "Bed linens," muttered the overseer, a woman with no eyebrows and lips stitched with scars. "Special care." Serafina stirred. The fabric unfurled like a corpse's shroud, revealing a handprint seared into the fibers. Not blood. Something thicker, darker, its edges shimmering as if dusted with crushed glass. A shadow fell over the vat. Genevieve stood there, a bundle of herbs clutched in her gnarled hand. "Feverfew," she said, tossing them into the water. The stench of rot bloomed, then died. "Keeps the dreams from sticking." "Whose dreams?" Serafina whispered. The old woman's milky eye twitched toward the ceiling. "Third tower, where the air smells of violets and rust." She pressed a damp scrap of linen into Serafina's palm, a monogram stitched in thread gone brown with age. E.A. Edric of Ravenshide, the sleeping king. The tower door wasn't locked. That was the first wrong thing. Serafina had waited until the midnight bell, when even the rats stilled in the walls. The stairs spiraled up, 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 their stones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The higher she climbed, the thicker the air grew, cloying with the scent of violets, yes, but beneath it the tang of old blood. Then she heard it. Breathing. Not the slow, even rhythm of sleep, but ragged, wet inhalations, as if the lungs behind them were half drowned. The door at the top stood ajar, a sliver of candlelight bleeding onto the landing. She pushed it open. The chamber was a mausoleum draped in velvet. Candles guttered in their sconces, their wax pooling like tears over tarnished silver. At the room's heart lay the bed, a monstrous thing of carved ebony, its posts etched with ravens mid-flight, and there, beneath sheets so white they glowed blue, lay the king. Edric was both less and more than the stories. His face was sunken, his black hair streaked with premature silver, but his lips, they moved, twitching around silent words. His fingers spasmed against the coverlet, the nails cracked and yellowed. Alive, not peacefully sleeping, but trapped. She stepped closer. A floorboard shrieked. The king's eyes flew open. Not the blank stare of a sleeper, not the glaze of madness. They were clear, sharp, aware, and they locked onto her with terrifying focus. His mouth worked, tendons straining in his neck. When the words came, they were cracked with disuse. "You're..." A shuddering breath. "Real." Serafina's pulse roared in her ears. "You're awake." A grimace. "Always." Then, boots on the stairs. The king's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. His touch burned his skin fever-hot. "Warwick," he rasped. "Don't let him..." The door burst open. Lord Bertram Warwick filled the doorway, his black cloak dusted with snow that hadn't fallen in weeks. His smile was a knife wound. "Well," he said, stepping into the candlelight, "what have we here?" Warwick's boots clicked against the stone floor like a spider's legs testing its web. Serafina's wrist still burned where the king had gripped her, his feverish touch branding her skin long after he'd gone limp again, his eyes rolling back into counterfeit sleep. "Curious," Warwick murmured, circling her. His cloak whispered against the rushes, the scent of frost and something faintly medicinal clinging to him. "Most servants have the sense to fear locked doors." Her throat tightened. It wasn't locked. A pause. His smile didn't reach his eyes the color of a winter pond, surface calm with rot beneath. "How fortunate for you." He leaned in, close enough that she caught the ghost of bitter almonds on his breath. "Tell me, girl, what did His Majesty say to you?" The lie came easily. "Nothing. He's asleep." Warwick's gloved hand shot out, gripping her chin. His thumb pressed against the hinge of her jaw, a silent threat. Sleep is a flexible term. Behind him, the king's fingers twitched against the sheets. "Come." The walk to the west wing was a descent into opulent decay. Gilded portraits lined the walls, their subjects' faces scraped away, leaving only hollow-eyed silhouettes. Warwick stopped before a door carved with ravens mid-feast. Inside, a feast of another kind lay rotting. A table groaned under spoiled meats and fruit crawling with larvae. Flies buzzed around a centerpiece, a silver platter cradling a single human hand, severed at the wrist, its fingers curled as if caught mid-prayer. The skin was grey, the nails split from struggle. Serafina gagged. "Look closer," Warwick purred. The hand's palm bore a mark, a brand in the shape of a key, the same symbol stitched into the bloody linens. "Lady Eleanor Ainsley," he said, plucking a grape from the table. It burst between his fingers, dripping red. "Last woman to tend the king's chambers. She believed she could wake him." A slow smile. She was right. A floorboard creaked behind them. Lady Beatrice stood in the doorway, a ledger clutched to her chest. Her gaze flicked from the hand to Serafina, something unreadable flashing in those dead eyes. "The girl is needed in the kitchens." Warwick sighed. "Always practical, Beatrice." He flicked a maggot from his sleeve. "Run along, little moth. But remember," his voice dropped to a whisper, "some flames don't light. They consume." The kitchens were no sanctuary. The scullery maid from that morning was gone. In her place, a new girl scrubbed the same blood-stained block, her arms shaking. No one spoke of the missing redhead. No one ever did. Genevieve found Serafina peeling turnips, their skins clinging like dead flesh. "You saw," the old woman muttered, pressing a knife into her hand. Its blade was etched with runes. "Saw what?" The king's waking eyes, the severed hand? The way Warwick's shadow didn't match his movements? "He breathes poison," Genevieve continued, nodding to the turnips. Juice dripped onto the table, foaming slightly. "In his food, in his wine. Enough to drown a man in nightmares, but never enough to kill." Her milky eye fixed on Serafina. "A sleeping king can't reclaim his throne." A crash from the pantry. Lady Beatrice stood there, a shattered jar of honey at her feet. Its contents oozed over the stones, too dark, too thick. "Attend the king's supper," she said, her voice brittle. Then, lower, "and pray he doesn't wake." The tray weighed more than it should. A single goblet, its contents shimmering like liquid sapphire. Serafina climbed the tower steps, her pulse hammering. The king's door was ajar again. Inside, Edric lay as before. But his lips were stained violet, his chest rising too fast. His eyes opened before she crossed the threshold. "Don't," he rasped. She set the tray down. The goblet's surface rippled, though no draught stirred the air. "They'll hear if I scream," he whispered. His pupils were wide, black swallowing gold, but they never hear the dreams. His hand trembled toward hers. "Take it." A vial, slick with sweat, pressed into her palm. Inside, a single drop of blood floated, swirling like a living thing. "Find the others," he breathed. Then his back arched, a silent scream contorting his features as the chamber door flew open. Warwick stood there, a physician's bag in hand. His smile was all teeth. "Ah," he said, "right on time." The vial burned in Serafina's palm like a living coal. She clenched her fist around it, the glass biting into her skin as Warwick strode toward the king's bed, his physician's bag clicking with hidden instruments. The scent of bitter almonds grew stronger, clinging to the back of her throat like a threat. "Leave us," Warwick said without looking at her. She dipped into a curtsy, the motion automatic, but her feet refused to move. The king's breath came in ragged gasps now, his fingers clawing at the sheets as if drowning in the open air. That single drop of blood in the vial pulsed against her skin, warm as a heartbeat. Warwick turned, his gaze dropped to her clenched hand. "Problem, girl?" A floorboard groaned behind them. Lady Beatrice stood in the doorway, her usual stern expression fractured by something raw. Fear? Warning? As her eyes darted between the king's writhing form and Warwick's poised syringe. "The council demands your presence," she said, her voice stripped of its usual steel. "The Duke of Blackmore has arrived unannounced." Warwick's jaw tightened. He hesitated, the needle glinting in the candlelight, then slipped it back into his bag with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Until tonight then, Your Majesty." The title dripped with venom. The moment the door closed behind them, Serafina ran. Not toward the safety of the kitchens, but down the hidden stairwell Genevieve had shown her, where the mortar wept black moisture between the stones. The vial grew heavier with every step, its contents sloshing thickly as though resisting containment. The undercroft smelled of earth and iron, rusted chains hung from the ceiling, their purpose lost to time. Here in the belly of Ravenshide, the walls whispered. Serafina pressed her ear to the coldest stone and heard it, a woman's voice, humming a lullaby. No, not humming, screaming. The notes stretched and warped into something unrecognizable, the sound seeping through the cracks like smoke. A hand clamped over her mouth. Genevieve dragged her behind a pillar, her milky eye wide with panic. "Fool child," she hissed, "they'll smell his blood on you." She snatched the vial, uncorked it with her teeth, and poured the droplet onto a scrap of parchment. The blood moved on its own, swirling into intricate patterns, letters in a language Serafina didn't know but somehow understood. Third dawn, the black well. "His messages are bound in blood," Genevieve muttered, rolling the parchment into a silver locket hidden beneath her shawl. "The king's only awake when the poison falters. Warwick's grown careless." A door slammed somewhere above. Boots pounded on stone. Genevieve shoved Serafina toward a crack in the wall barely wider than her shoulders. "The wells beneath the old chapel. Go, now." The passage swallowed her whole. It wasn't a tunnel but a throat, slick with moisture, pulsing with heat. Serafina crawled forward on hands and knees, the darkness pressing against her eyelids, her breath echoing back as if something large were breathing with her. The air tasted of wet metal and violets. Then light, faint and greenish, filtering through roots that had broken through the ceiling. The well yawned before her, its stones blackened by something thicker than age. No water, no bucket, just a single iron hook driven into the rim from which dangled a lock of hair tied with red string. Serafina reached for it. The well reached back. A gust of air sighed upward, carrying voices, dozens, hundreds, all whispering at once. Women's voices, the missing maids. Their words tangled together, but one phrase rose above the rest, clear as a bell. "He sees through the king's eyes." A hand burst from the well. Bone thin, its fingers ending in ragged nails, it scrabbled at the stones. Serafina stumbled back as a head emerged. Not a corpse, not a ghost, but a living woman. Her face was gaunt, her eyes wide and unblinking, her lips sewn shut with coarse black thread. She thrust a bundle into Serafina's arms before the well swallowed her again. The package was warm, wrapped in what might have been a child's shirt. It held a journal, its pages brittle with age, and a silver key stained brown at the teeth. The journal fell open to a sketch of Warwick standing over a kneeling figure, pouring something from a vial into their mouth. The caption, written in the same swirling script as the blood message, read, "The first betrayal. He drinks his own poison now." A floorboard creaked behind her. Serafina spun, clutching the key like a dagger. Lady Beatrice stood at the mouth of the passage, her usually pristine gown smeared with dirt. In her hands she held a tray, the same one Serafina had brought to the king's chambers. The goblet was empty now, its interior crusted with blue residue. "I tried," Beatrice whispered. Then louder, "I tried to stop him." Her hands shook. The king wasn't the first. There were others before. His brother, his father, all sleeping, all dreaming. She stepped closer, her breath coming fast. "Warwick's running out of time. The poison needs fresh blood to work now. That's why the maids—" Her shadow detached itself from the wall behind her. Warwick's gloved hand closed around Beatrice's throat. "Tut tut," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. "Loose tongues get cut out." Beatrice's eyes met Serafina's one last time, not with fear, but with fury, before Warwick snapped her neck with a sound like green wood breaking. He let the body drop. "Now," he said, stepping over it, "let's talk about what you stole from my well." The key's teeth bit into Serafina's palm as she backed away from Warwick, Orus' advancing shadow. His boots crunched over the scattered pages of the journal, his smile widening as he noted her gaze flick toward the dead woman at his feet. Beatrice always did have a flair for the dramatic, he mused, towing the corpse with unsettling tenderness. Pity she never learned when to stop talking. The well's whispers rose to a fever pitch behind her, the voices overlapping in a chorus of warnings. Serafina's heel hit the blackened stones of the rim. No retreat left. Warwick lunged. She threw herself sideways, the key slashing upward. It caught his cheek, drawing a thin line of blood that didn't drip so much as crawl down his face, beading like mercury before soaking back into his skin. He froze, fingers pressed to the wound, his breath coming in short, startled bursts. "You," he whispered, "shouldn't be able to do that." The journal pages rustled at their feet. Serafina caught a glimpse of an illustration. A key just like hers plunged into a man's chest, his mouth open in a silent scream. She ran. The tunnel walls seemed to pulse around her, contracting and expanding like a living thing trying to swallow her whole. The whispers followed, nipping at her heels, their words resolving into something horrifyingly clear. The blood is the lock. The blood is the key. She burst into the chapel just as the castle bell tolled 3. Dawn's first light seeped through the stained glass, painting the pews in fractured colors. The silver key in her hand grew warm, then hot, its teeth twisting like living metal until it pointed, unmistakably, toward the altar. A crash from the tunnel entrance. Warwick was coming. The altar stone slid aside at her touch, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling into darkness. The air that rushed up reeked of wet feathers and burnt honey. Somewhere below, something scratched against stone. Serafina descended. The chamber at the bottom defied reason. Walls lined with jars of floating eyes, all pupil, all watching. A ceiling hung with dried hands, their fingers twitching in an unfelt breeze. And at the center, a chair, not a throne, a restraint. Leather straps hung loose, the buckles stained with something that glistened blue in the torchlight. The scratching came from behind a tapestry depicting a raven feasting on a sun. Serafina yanked it aside to reveal a door. No, a face carved into the stone, its mouth stretched wide around a keyhole. The silver key trembled in her grip. "Do it," whispered a voice that wasn't hers. She plunged the key into the stone mouth. It screamed. The wall split open like a wound, revealing a cell barely large enough for the figure curled inside. A man, skeletally thin, his hair matted with filth, his wrists raw from shackles. When he lifted his head, Serafina's breath caught. Same sharp cheekbones, same gold-flecked eyes, another Edric. This one's lips cracked open, spilling a trickle of blackened blood. "Finally," he croaked, "the last key-bearer." Footsteps pounded on the stairs above. Warwick's laughter echoed down, bouncing off the jars, until it seemed to come from all directions at once. The not Edric grasped her wrist, his touch burning with the same unnatural heat as the king's. "The blood," he gasped. "You have to choose." A drop of Warwick's blood still clung to the key's teeth, shimmering with that same unnatural light. The prisoner's eyes locked onto it with desperate hunger. "Feed it to him," the man whispered. "The real him. Or—" His gaze darted to the approaching footsteps. "Let me drink it and I'll show you what walks in his skin." The jars began to rattle. One by one, the eyes inside rolled toward her, their pupils dilating. The hanging hands spasmed, fingers curling into claws. Warwick's shadow stretched across the floor, his voice sing-song. Little moth, why do you hide? The prisoner bared teeth filed to points. Decide. The key trembled in Serafina's hand, Warwick's single drop of blood sliding along its teeth like a living thing. Before her, the shackled man who wore the king's face panted like a starved dog, his cracked lips parting in anticipation. Behind her, Warwick's footsteps slowed, deliberate now, savoring the hunt. The jars of eyes lining the walls wept thick black tears that sizzled where they struck the stone. Choose. She brought the key to the prisoner's mouth. His tongue, blackened and forked, darted out to lick the blood. The world tore open. Serafina's vision splintered into 1,000 shards of memory not her own. A younger Warwick kneeling in this very chamber, offering a goblet to a man with Edric's eyes. The first sip is always sweet, your majesty. The king drinking deep, then screaming as his skin bubbled, his shadow detaching from his body and taking solid form, a perfect smiling copy. The real Edric dragged kicking into the cell, his doppelganger straightening the crown on his own head with a sigh. Much better. The vision snapped like a over-tightened lute string. The prisoner, the true Edric, gripped her wrists with sudden strength, his eyes wild. Now you see, he rasped. That thing wearing my face up there isn't just poisoning me, it's eating me, one dream at a time. Above them, Warwick's humming grew louder, a nursery tune warped beyond recognition. Edric's fingers dug into her flesh. The blood you carry is his anchor to this world. Spill it, and his flesh will unravel. His gaze dropped to the key. Or feed it to me and I can fight him from within. A shadow fell across the threshold. Warwick stood there, but not as she knew him. His skin rippled like water, his edges blurring where the torchlight touched him. The cut she'd given him on his cheek gaped open, revealing not bone or muscle, but a swirling darkness that drank the light. Ah, he sighed. The last Claremont girl. I wondered when your bloodline would slither back to me. Serafina's breath hitched. Bloodline? The prisoner's grip tightened. Your grandmother stood where you stand now. She chose mercy over vengeance. A bitter laugh. It's why you're still breathing. Warwick, no, the thing wearing him, tipped its head. Poor Eleanor. She screamed so prettily when I peeled her skin. Its fingers elongated, claws scraping the ceiling. Shall we see if you inherited her voice? Serafina acted without thought. She slammed the key into the prisoner's chest, not to free him, to stab him. The reaction was instantaneous. The false Warwick shrieked, his form unraveling like yarn from a spindle. Darkness pouring from his mouth, his eyes, the wound on his cheek. The true Edric gasped, his back arching as the key's teeth sank deeper, the drop of Warwick's blood sizzling where it met his skin. Clever girl, he choked out. Then his eyes rolled back and the screaming began. Not from him, from upstairs. The castle itself seemed to howl, stones grinding as if in agony. The jars of eyes burst one by one, their viscous contents slithering toward the door like serpents made of shadow. The hanging hands spasmed, their fingers pointing, accusing at Serafina. She wrenched the key free and ran, the prisoner's laughter chasing her up the stairs. He'll come for you now! He'll come for the last key-bearer! The chapel was in chaos. The stained glass had shattered, the figures of saints now weeping blood from their shattered eyes. The altar stone had sealed itself shut, but the key in her hand burned hotter, its teeth twisting to point toward the king's tower. She ran through corridors that bent unnaturally, walls breathing in and out like living things. Servants cowered in corners, their hands over their ears, their mouths moving in silent screams. The air reeked of violets and rotting meat. Then she saw him. The king, the false one, stood at the base of the tower stairs, his body contorted at impossible angles, his mouth unhinged like a snake's. A voice that was not his own pouring forth, "You broke the chain!" Behind him, the real Warwick lay sprawled on the steps, his chest a gaping hole where his heart should be. His gloved fingers twitched toward her, not in threat, in pleading. The king's head rotated fully backward. "You think you've won." His golden eyes were gone, replaced by swirling black pits. "I am older than stones, hungrier than time." his arm elongated, bones cracking as he reached for her. "I'll wear your skin next, keybearer." Serafina did the only thing left. She plunged the key into her own palm. Her blood, thick and shockingly red, dripped onto the stones. Where it struck, the castle shuddered. The false king recoiled, his stolen flesh bubbling. "No, the pact forbids it." The ground opened beneath them. Serafina fell into darkness. The last thing she heard the prisoner's voice whispering through the stones. "Find the well's heart. That's where he keeps the others." The darkness swallowed Serafina whole. She fell through layers of memory not her own, cold hands grabbing at her ankles, whispers like drowned voices bubbling up from below. Her blood still dripped from the key's teeth, each drop glowing faintly red as it vanished into the void. Then, impact, not stone, not water, something soft and yielding that gasped when she landed upon it. "Get off, you fool girl!" Genevieve's voice. Serafina rolled to her knees, the key clutched tight. They were in a cavern of sorts, the walls made not of rock but of interlocked human arms, their fingers twitching in some unfelt current. The ceiling pulsed with bioluminescent veins, casting a sickly green light over the horror below. The well's heart was a garden of women. Dozens of them stood frozen in various states of decay, their feet rooted in black water that lapped at their knees. Some were little more than skeletons draped in rotting lace. Others looked freshly drowned, their skin still plump, their hair floating around them like seaweed. All had their mouths sewn shut with the same black thread. All had their eyes wide open, pupils blown so wide the irises were nearly gone. And at the center, arms outstretched as if crucified by the water itself, floated Eleanor Claremont. Serafina's grandmother looked exactly as she had in the portrait hidden beneath her childhood bed, same strong nose, same stubborn set to the jaw. Even in death, even with her lips stitched into a permanent scream, she looked furious. Genevieve grabbed Serafina's shoulder, her nails drawing blood. "Don't look at their eyes. That's how he traps you." Too late. Eleanor's gaze locked onto hers, and the world dissolved again. A younger Eleanor, vibrant and alive, pressing a silver key into her daughter's tiny hand. "Hide this, my heart. Never let them see you cry." The same key, Serafina's key, being used to lock a door behind which something shrieked and pounded. Warwick, but not Warwick, never Warwick, smiling as Eleanor drank poisoned tea. "The Claremont women always make the best locks." Serafina wrenched herself free with a gasp, her nose bleeding onto the stagnant water. It steamed where the blood hit, revealing glimpses of things moving beneath the surface. Pale, elongated shapes circling like sharks. Genevieve shook her hard. "Listen, your blood woke the well, but it's not enough to break the seal. You have to choose." She pointed to the drowning women. "One to take your place as anchor, or the whole castle comes down on our heads." The water was rising. Serafina stared at her grandmother's corpse. The truth was a knife to the ribs. This was why her mother had fled Ravenshide, why she died penniless in a ditch rather than return. The Claremont women weren't just victims, they were sacrifices. The first stitch popped on Eleanor's lips, then the second. By the fifth, the scream that tore free shook the cavern. "Run, you stupid child!" The other women stirred, their own threads snapping as the thing in the water, the true horror behind Warwick, behind the false king, surged upward. It had no true form, just a mass of grasping hands and gnashing teeth, its voice the composite shrieks of every woman it had ever consumed. Genevieve shoved Serafina toward a narrow tunnel. "Go, I'll hold it." "No, there has to be another." The old woman smiled, showing teeth filed to points just like the prisoner's. "Oh girl, I've been dead for 30 years. She turned to face the monstrosity, her shawl falling away to reveal the gaping hole in her back where her spine should have been. "Tell my grandson I'm sorry I couldn't save him twice." The water swallowed her whole. Serafina ran, the screams of the drowning women propelling her forward. The tunnel twisted like a gut, its walls slick with things that squirmed under her fingertips. The key burned hotter with every step, its teeth now fused to her flesh, her blood feeding it, fueling it. She burst into the king's chamber, just as the false Edric's skin split down the middle, revealing the writhing darkness beneath. It turned its hollow gaze on her, the voice that emerged a grotesque parody of Genevieve. You can to kill what is already dead, keybearer. Serafina raised her ruined hand. Good thing I'm not trying to kill you, she whispered. Just lock you away. The key slid home, not into stone, not into flesh, but into the air itself, turning with a sound like 1,000 doors slamming shut. The castle held its breath. Then the screaming began in earnest. The key screamed in Serafina's palm, its silver teeth now fused to her flesh, the metal pulsing like a second heartbeat as the castle shuddered around her. The false king's skin had peeled away entirely, revealing the writhing darkness beneath, a thing of endless hunger and hollow eyes that now fixed upon her with something almost like recognition. You, it hissed, its voice the composite of every scream that had ever echoed through Ravenshide's halls. Last of the keybearers, first of the new chain, the air itself seemed to thicken as the entity advanced, its form shifting between a dozen nightmares, sometimes Warwick's smiling malice, sometimes Genevieve's hollow-eyed warning, sometimes her grandmother's stitched-shut mouth working soundlessly. The floorboards cracked beneath its weight, tendrils of black smoke rising from the gaps like grasping fingers. Serafina stumbled back, her blood-slick hand leaving smears on the bedpost where the true Edric still lay trapped in poisoned sleep. His chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, his eyelids fluttering as if fighting to open. The key burned hotter against her skin, its heat traveling up her arm in waves that carried whispers. Break the cycle. Finish what we started. Let us rest. The voices of the drowning women, their words clear now, unburdened by the well's suffocating depths. The entity laughed, a sound like shattering glass. They always beg at the end, just like your grandmother when she realized. Serafina moved without thought. She plunged the key into the sleeping king's chest, not to kill, to wake. The effect was instantaneous. Edric's back arched off the bed, his mouth opening in a soundless scream as golden light erupted from the wound. Not blood, but something purer, brighter. It filled the chamber, scouring the shadows from the walls, sending the entity recoiling with a shriek that shook the very foundations of Ravenshide. The light took shape. Hundreds of women, translucent but radiant, their stitches gone, their mouths finally free. Eleanor stood at the forefront, her hand outstretched toward the writhing mass of darkness. You took our voices, she said, and the castle itself seemed to lean in to listen. But you never took our will. As one, the women turned to Serafina. Sing, granddaughter. And she understood. The key had never been meant to lock the horror away. It had been meant to transform it. Serafina opened her mouth, and the song that poured forth was one she'd never learned, but somehow knew by heart. A lullaby in a language older than stone, its notes weaving through the golden light, through the screaming dark, through the very cracks in reality itself. The entity thrashed, its form unraveling, its shrieks softening to whimpers as the melody worked its way deep, 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 until all that remained was a single, trembling shadow, no larger than a child's hand. Edric sat up, gasping, his eyes clear for the first time in a decade. He reached out, cupping the shadow gently. "Oh, little brother," he whispered, "what did they make you into?" The truth struck Serafina like a physical blow. This was no ancient evil. This was the lost prince, Edric's twin, stillborn and buried beneath Ravenshide's foundations, his soul twisted by generations of dark rituals into something ravenous. The women's ghosts began to fade, their smiles peaceful. Eleanor lingered longest, pressing a kiss to Serafina's forehead. "The song was always the key," she murmured. "The blood just helped you remember." Then they were gone. Dawn broke over Ravenshide, true dawn, for the first time in living memory. The ivy strangling the towers burst into bloom, white flowers unfurling like surrender flags. The moors beyond the gates shimmered with dew instead of mist, and in the courtyard below, the surviving servants emerged, blinking like newborns, their faces turned toward the sun. Edric, pale, shaking but alive, knelt before Serafina, the shadow cradled against his chest. "You could leave now," he said quietly. "No one would blame you." She looked at her hand, where the key had melted into her flesh, leaving only a silver scar in the shape of a raven in flight. Then at the castle, already breathing differently, its stones sighing in relief. Finally, at the man who had endured a decade of torment rather than let his people suffer alone. "I think," she said, taking his free hand, "I'll stay." And somewhere deep below, the well's waters ran clear at last. A year had turned since the shadows bled from Ravenshide's stones, and still Serafina caught herself holding her breath at odd moments. When the evening light gilded the towers just so, when the kitchens erupted in laughter instead of whispers, when Edric's fingers brushed hers as they walked the rebuilt corridors. The throne room, once a mausoleum of velvet and dust, now teemed with petitioners. Farmers from the southern villages, their arms laden with the first apple harvest in decades. Children from the rebuilt orphanage, their cheeks round with regular meals, clutching drawings of the nice ghost ladies who tucked them in at night. And always, always, the women. They came in quiet pairs at first, then in bold groups, millers' daughters and merchant widows, their hands still bearing the calluses of survival. They touched the new tapestries Serafina had commissioned, not hunting scenes or battles, but a great golden tree, its roots cradling a shadow no bigger than a child's hand, its branches heavy with names stitched in silver thread. Eleanor, Genevieve, Aveline, Lisbeth, every woman who had ever drowned in the well. Does it hurt? The question came from a girl of maybe 7, her fingers hovering over Serafina's scar. The raven-shaped mark had never faded, though it no longer burned. Serafina knelt, letting the child trace the silver lines. Not anymore. It's like a reminder that some locks are meant to be opened, not closed. Across the room, Edric stood by the rebuilt stained glass windows, sunlight painting him in hues of amber and rose. The shadow, the child perched on his shoulder, no longer formless but shaped now into a small, curious raven. It pecked playfully at his ear, and the king's laughter rang clear as chapel bells. In the courtyard below, the blackened well had burst open the morning after the transformation, its stones split by a sapling that grew unnaturally fast. Now it stood 3 times a man's height, its white blossoms drifting like snow even in midsummer. The servants called it the mourning tree, though there was no grief beneath its boughs, only women leaving ribbons in its branches, and men kneeling to press their foreheads to its roots, and children napping in its shade without nightmares. That evening, as the first stars pricked the sky, Serafina found Edric in their chambers, the shadow raven nestled in his cupped hands. It had grown no larger, but its eyes were brighter, its feathers less insubstantial. "He spoke today," Edric murmured. "Just one word." She didn't need to ask. The way he cradled the creature, his brother, his guilt, his second chance, said everything. Outside, the wind stirred the mourning tree's branches, carrying the scent of blossoms and fresh-turned earth through every open window. Somewhere in the castle, a lullaby rose, sung by a dozen voices in imperfect harmony. And for the first time in centuries, Ravenshide slept without dreaming of teeth. Were you touched by this message? Like it now, subscribe to the channel and share it. Someone needs it today, and that click could change everything.